Well, hello there and welcome to another video. This is Stephanie and you're at Studio Gigi. In today's video, it is another beginning watercolor tutorial and we will be painting an apple. And I've added a reference picture this time so that you can look at that and follow along if you're painting this with me, or just so that I can reference this in my own drawing and while I'm talking about it. So if you notice the apple, right now I'm just drawing the apple, so just trying to put some simple shapes down, which a circle is not always so simple. I had to erase quite a bit and still didn't quite get the shape of the apple, but that's okay. With the apple, while we're getting into this next part, I want you to notice the colors that you see in the apple. We see yellows, oranges, there's even some pink in the highlight at the top of the apple. There's some darker colors, some darker greens, even maybe purple. If you look really closely enough, you can see all sorts of different colors within that red apple. I'm just getting a really diluted puddle of yellow down, and I'm just going to add that to my leaf. So the reference picture doesn't have a leaf in it, and oftentimes when I use a reference picture I try to change it up in some small way, and for this apple I decided to add a leaf. I will regret this later. So if you're going to paint this apple, you might want to watch all the way through. But anyway, it's a good idea when you use a reference picture just to add your own little flair to it, or add a little extra element to it, just to change it up a bit. Okay, so I'm laying down this yellow just as an more or less just an underpainting, and you'll be able to see that with glazing that we'll do with some red later. If you look at the apple, you definitely see a lot of yellow and different colors in that reference picture. So I've just got the quinacridone magenta and I'm adding a little rose madder hue to it, and I'm painting just a real thin layer of this over the top of the apple, and mostly I'm just doing this so that I can use the wet on wet technique. Just making sure I have that covered. So I'm just adding some color where I want. I'm looking at the apple, trying to match some of the colors that are there, dropping in because some places I want to be darker than others. And I'm just charging my paintbrush and dropping in the paint on that wet on wet and just letting it feather out. I'm just adding some of the permanent yellow and some of the rose madder hue, and I'm letting the color mix on the paper. And now I'm trying to lift out some of that color where I covered my light up. from where the light is coming in at the top of the apple. My apple shade got a little wonky here, but I'm not going to let it bother me too much. Try to do a little course correction here, but it doesn't necessarily work out in my favor. So while I'm just dropping in these colors and just layering this apple, this was actually the first tutorial that I had for the watercolor one-on-one, just the basics. This was actually a part of the original video, but when I'm doing the apple, as I'm working through this apple, I'm like, in the back of my head, this video is going to be way too long. So I ended up chopping it out of that video and initially was going to release this one first, but then just had a change of heart and decided, almost didn't release this one at all. But you know, not everything necessarily works out the way exactly how you wanted it to, but I do think there are some points to be made in this apple. So I went ahead and put this video together, and hopefully you'll get something from it. So I love the vibrancy of watercolor when it's wet. It is just beautiful. I'm just looking at this, and in a few minutes you'll see how much it changes once it dries. It is crazy how much watercolor lightens. And it may be the brand that I'm using. I'm using Turner Artist Watercolors here, but I am venturing out into some Daniel Smith, and I've ordered some M. Graham. So I'm really interested to see what happens, you know, with those paints. And you know, right now I'm just adding some green on top of that yellow on the leaf of my apple. And again, just that's a glazing technique. You can still see a little of the yellow through. I am getting it a little darker here, but at the same time, these watercolors, they really lighten up. And here we go. It says wait for it. You just see the dramatic change in the watercolor vibrancy as it dries. So that's why layering is such a big thing in watercolor. Anyway, so I'm going to lay down another little layer of my different reds, trying to make sure I leave that light on top of the apple. Watercolor lifts really well when it's wet. It'll also lift once it's dry. It's just a little more work. You have to scrub it a little bit, but you'll see me do that a few times during this painting where I have to go back and lift out that color so that I can have the light, the highlight on top of the apple. Just mixing in a little blue with my rose madder and quinacridone to get a little bit of a shadow under that leaf. I often use purples to add shadows. And lifting some of that color out. And I do this with just a clean, or it's not actually clean, but it's just a wet brush, because I still want that color to kind of bleed back into that to make it look more natural. And here I'm just adding a little green. You can see on the reference picture there's a little yellowish green down there. And throughout the apple, I'm not going to add all these little green dots, but just enough to give it the appearance of being an apple. So here's where I came in with my green and I realized the pigment was too dark. So I just rinsed my brush and came back in with just some water to kind of blend that pigment out. One of my favorite things with painting is actually mixing paint. And I mixed up a pretty dark color here, and in my head I'm telling myself this is going to fade a lot, so I'm going to make it a little darker than I needed it to. And this doing things like this is just how you learn that maybe it didn't need to be as dark as I made it. I could have come back through and added a another layer, because it does come out looking pretty dark toward the end. At this point in the painting, I could have just put the stem in and been done. So I like to have those little cards to swatch out colors when I do mix a new color, just to make sure it's the color I want. And oftentimes if I don't, I find myself having to remix it or do what I did earlier and pull some paint out. I'm just mixing up a little orange here. And I'll loosely put that in there, just in those places that you see the brighter red on the apple. For these tutorials, I have been doing some really basic, simple things because that is how I learn. If I am freaking out about the actual drawing part of it, if it's a landscape or architecture, the drawing, I get too caught up in that. So for these tutorials, I have been doing things that just use simple shapes and the techniques that we talked about earlier, and that was purposely done. I have, in my learning how to do watercolor days years ago, took a course, paid for a course, took it, and it started much like I have started here, with just some basic shapes and just learning techniques and using those techniques over and over again. And then I went to YouTube and found some beginning watercolor videos that basically had me quit watercolor for some time because I was so frustrated with the medium. But hopefully these have been helpful for anyone who is just starting out. So I've got the brown mixed up and putting in my stem. But here we are. It has lightened up substantially. And I was kind of over this leaf. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I was regretting my decision to add it in. I'm just kind of giving it a once over and going to go through and make some final touches to it. Just adding the little lines that you see on the apple, the little lines of color. And I didn't actually have to do this. I could have left it as it was, but I thought, let's see what this looks like. And just adding some more concentrated color and coming back and diluting it with water to just kind of put those lines in there. Okay, so basically just going to go through and make some touch-ups here on my apple, and thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, would you please give it a thumbs up? It really does help my little channel. I will be putting out lots more watercolor videos in the future, so if that's something that interests you, you could subscribe and turn that notification bell on. And again, thank you so much for joining me today, and until next time, see you later. Keep practicing.